Hello, everyone. This is Aaron Lelito here with you. I am the main editor behind the scenes here at Wild Roof Journal, and I'm excited to introduce a new feature that is part of our issue number 5. If you're a previous reader of Wild Roof Journal, you would have seen the interview features that are in each issue. So far, we've had 3 visual artists and 1 writer. And these interviews were really one of my favorite parts about putting each issue together. And because of that, I wanted to expand on that in the upcoming issues, starting with this one. So given a few technical upgrades that I've done on my end, and finding a willing participant for this new adventure here, and I'll say more about her in a minute, I made the move to an audio format for the interview. Personally speaking, I love listening to interview-based podcasts, so my attempt here is to just copy a little bit about what I like about that format and apply it to my own interests, namely bringing some of the talented and often underappreciated creative people out there to a wider audience. Maybe even getting into a deeper dive into their work and their approach to the creative process. I'm endlessly fascinated by the ways in which people create their art, their poems, stories, photographs, paintings. If you've read one of the previous issues, you can see there is such an interesting process going on behind the scenes of a finished piece. Often I find that when I ask questions about the artist's mindset or their thought process behind them, there's really a lot going on. Oftentimes, what we don't see has deep roots into the artist's past. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with a photographer named Caroline Russell. You'll see some of her chlorophyll prints featured here on this website. And if you're interested in seeing more of her work, please visit her website at carolinerussellphotography.com. She is on Instagram as well at Caroline Russell Art. And while you're on Instagram, you might as well follow us at Wild Roof Journal and keep tabs with the artists and writers that we're featuring from each of our issues that we also post on Instagram. It was really great to learn a bit more about Caroline's background, and oddly enough, it happened to overlap with my own in a couple of ways, namely the intersection of literary and visual arts, which is a concept I've built Wild Roof Journal around. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation, and I hope to continue these audio features in our future issues. Thanks for reading, and thanks for listening. The first thing I wanted to ask a little bit about is just your start in the art world or your beginning interest in art, and perhaps even maybe a formative experience that you had or you think back to.
Sure. So I began, I guess, photography really in high school. I started, taking this photography class my sophomore year, and we were fortunate enough that we actually had a darkroom in my high school. We actually didn't do any digital work. We just did analog photography, and I mean, right from then I was hooked. I loved kind of learning about the process. Me being born in, I guess, a more digital world, the idea of film was really fascinating. And I loved, loading the film on the reels to be developed, fiddling around with the enlarger, burning and dodging. And that kind of jump-started this whole experimental side of photography that I didn't really knew existed, or I didn't really realize how, wide of a field it was. And so when I got to college, I decided to major in studio art with a focus in photography, as well as writing. I always call writing my first love, because I've been writing since I was like very young, like 5, 6 years old. So I decided to major in writing and in photography. I went to a small liberal arts school, and I they also had a dark room there, so I got to experiment, and kind of explore photography more. And I decided to continue that outside of college too, and just kind of see how far can I push photography. What other experimental processes can I stumble upon and perfect. So but it actually really all started with that one class I just happened to take in high school.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting too because I had an experience in high school taking a photography class. It didn't catch on, I guess, like it did in your trajectory, but I always remember that photography class in high school, and like you said, the whole dark room, developing the film, and it was just black and white photography. And I
Yeah.
always found that I was always so glad to have that experience, even though I didn't really pursue analog photography really beyond that. But yeah, there was something to, like, the stakes were so high, I guess, even if it was just a high school class, that developing
Yeah.
the film and had to be completely dark, and you couldn't let any light in to ruin it along the way.
Yeah, because it's like, that's your image, and once you take that one picture on the film, and if you overexpose it or if you expose your film, it's kind of like that's it, which was something completely foreign to me. So I totally agree. The stakes were so high and you wanted everything to be just right, but I ended up kind of really liking that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know I'm thinking I do more with digital, either digital photography as a starting point, and I use that in different ways to edit and layer things. And I really like that process because you could undo just about anything as long as you're careful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I really, it's some, I don't know, like comfort, or it's just I like
It's a nice little
trying.
safety net,
Yeah,
I
I could
feel.
try 10 different things, and I like two of them, and I could just do and undo as much as I want. But yeah, just thinking back to that idea of, yeah, that the image, and you have to take great care with that from start to finish. So that's a good starting point. Yeah, you called English or writing your first love. So was that started even in childhood that you started to love writing or anything like
Ye-
that?
Yeah, so I remember distinctly, when I was younger, I would always write, little poems, like on little post-it notes, and I would like give them to my mom. I think they were like the greatest thing in the world, and she would like, stick them on the fridge. And as I got older, I say older, but I was really probably like, 10 or 12. I like started writing like, short stories and like fantasy, and um I just really kind of enjoyed writing, and I kind of always have. And I remember when I was younger, I like kind of wanted to even back then combine my English and art. And I thought, I'm going to be like a comic book like writer, and like, do my drawings and like the dialogue and stuff. I remember making my own comic strips, and I did not pursue that area. I am not a comic book writer, but I do still write today. I still kind of focus in, short fiction, mainly because, I feel like we're all busy nowadays. So I like to find little pockets of time where I can write. And, short fiction is kind of a great like medium for that, just because I can, find little pockets to write, and I can also just end the story in kind of 20 pages or so. I hope one day I'll be able to write a larger novel, but I'm really kind of enjoying like the short form at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds great too. Yeah, I did want to ask a little bit about the overlap, or what you saw as the different connections between the English side of things, even just in the academic sense, and the studio art. So even when you were in college, it sounds like these two things were really tied together, as opposed to like two, kind of using two different parts of your brain. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think my writing and my photography are kind of linked, in a way. And I think, this is kind of mainly due to one of my photography professors, Karina Skaversky. I had the opportunity to actually work for her my junior and senior year. And so she actually did a lot of photography with text. So I kind of saw firsthand kind of how these two forms can kind of join together and make a like coherent piece and a coherent work of art. And so that kind of just opened up my mind to kind of experiencing kind of different forms of art and like different mediums, and actually kind of dabbling in mixed media too. Up until then I was kind of really just focusing on photography, and like that's kind of it. But then I'm like, well, other mediums can come into play too. So yeah, I kind of really got that inspiration from my time with Karina.
Yeah, that's interesting as well because my I'm an English professor, so my background is in more on the English side of things, and creatively, that's really what I think of first when I was trying to do something creative. It would always be writing. Not that really many other people saw it other than me at the time, but the big push came from the combination of using text and images together.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really a big piece of inspiration that came along, I guess, in my life too. So that connection there is, I think, an interesting one. I think it could go so many different directions.
Right. And like even when I, think of an idea for like a future art project, I always kind of like, like write it down. Like I have, journals with just scribbles of, random ideas. So, definitely kind of, not only using text in art, but also just kind of using, words to kind of describe what's in my head, and, putting that into like an artist statement so that the viewer can understand. I'm constantly thinking about text and how I can kind of use it to further like leverage my work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's maybe one other thing I wanted to ask about. I could kind of skip to it a little bit. Is you mentioned the experimentation, and I do want to get a little bit more in the general sense of how you got intrigued by the experimental photography and different development techniques. But just this specifically the chlorophyll prints, like how do you explain your interest in it, or like why was that something that became appealing out of those experimental techniques?
Yeah, so it's kind of a long and roundabout story, but after college, I took a little bit of a hiatus from like making art for a little bit, trying to get my bearings in the real world. But after a period of time I really kind of wanted to do an art project and have it be experimental. And also during this time I was like very reflective, thinking about where am I going, but also thinking about my past, like my childhood, like how did I get here. um, all those thoughts kind of in my head, and it kind of made me think about memories. And um, I read a lot about the human mind and how our memories aren't as strong as we think they are. um, and they're actually quite delicate and are prone to actually, we have frayed memories or memories that are completely made up, unbeknownst to us. And this idea is just absolutely fascinating. But I want to do an art project on this, but I thought, well, I do photography, and it's a medium seen as something as permanent. It's seen as also a form of documentation, so something as accurate. And that's how I kind of came upon chlorophyll printing, because it's a method of photography, I guess. You kind of you use a leaf, as light sensitive paper, I guess, in a way. Um, but it doesn't really last forever. It kind of fades over time, no matter what, just because you're using organic material. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of actually mimic the human mind. So I kind of got to do this experimental process and also use this kind of really cool like organic material, which I was really intrigued by.
That is interesting. I really like the idea that it is connected to kind of a deeper meaning of memory you mentioned, and kind of how the mind works, how the leaf essentially becomes an external representation of the internal process. where, like you said, memories can be frayed or combined together or fade over time, all those kinds of things. Does the image actually fade over time, or is like how does the actual leaf, how does that change over the, at least since you've been doing it, how does it change over that amount of time?
Yeah, so I've actually been doing chlorophyll printing for about a year now. So prints that I've actually done last summer, if if they're kept in an environment where they don't get direct sunlight, like like artificial light from like a light bulb is okay, but if they actually get sunlight, coming through a window, they do fade with time. But like I said, like I have prints from last summer, and they've hung in galleries. I always tell galleries, hang them away from a window or like on a north facing wall, and like they'll be okay. And um they it has faded a little bit in terms of it's not as green as it once was, but the image, you can distinctly tell what it is. So it's really just about taking care of them, and kind of making sure that they don't really get that sunlight. I have seen other artists who do this process actually preserve them in resin, but you kind of lose like the leafy paper quality of them, which is what I really like. But if you really want to preserve prints, you actually can preserve them in kind of like a block of resin. But then I kind of think it becomes more of like a sculpture in a way, which is, another kind of like fascinating aspect of it.
Do you find yourself like not wanting the picture to fade, or is it something like you embrace, or is it something that in the back of your mind you want it to stay how you made it at first?
I think my photographer brain is like, oh, like I want this, to stay. Like I want, exactly how it is. But I think I've kind of learned to embrace that, it will kind of change and alter over time. And, that is okay that happens. And, even if you kind of preserve these prints in a darker room, like, over years, it will kind of fade eventually. But I've kind of learned to, embrace it. And yeah, like I mean, like I said, like other artists kind of preserve them in resin, but I don't know, there's just something that you kind of lose about the chlorophyll print. It doesn't feel like a leaf anymore. It just kind of feels like you're holding a block of resin. So I kind of like how this delicate leaf paper like quality. So I've kind of learned to embrace the delicateness of it.
Right, exact. That makes total sense. I'm just thinking in my own mind, if I happen to do one of these chlorophyll prints, there's just that something nagging, like I want to make sure this like stays, and like you said, like over long periods of time.
Yeah, and I will
Um,
say I found that some leaves do work better than others in terms of having the image stay. Like, I mean, like I said, I've only been doing this for a year, so the oldest prints that I have are maybe a year and a half old. So, and I've seen that some leaves kind of do are tougher than others. So that's also kind of a part of the experimental process.
sure. Well, yeah, going back a little bit to I guess just the bigger picture of using some of these experimental techniques, I guess specifically in photography, but you can think about it in any context that works for you. Um, like, yeah, what is it about that sense of experimentation that you find appealing?
Um, I think I really like the experimental process because it's more of a challenge to me. I think it's kind of ironic because I'm a perfectionist at heart, and I feel like with these experimental techniques, you probably won't ever reach true perfection. But I do like the challenge, and kind of learning these new techniques that aren't really familiar with me, because I feel like anything else I just get kind of bored. I kind of like not knowing what's going to happen. And I also, I'm a creative and artistic individual, but I also kind of have a scientific, like methodical brain. So I kind of like thinking of a hypothesis, like if I do X, I think the results will be Y. And then I like conducting that experiment. And if I don't get the results I wanted, I like to adjust certain things and kind of see how that plays out. So it's a very creative process, but also very kind of methodical and scientific, which I also really enjoy.
Right, and the analysis process, and if you mentioned the problem solving idea, that doing it once, trying to figure out how to make it better. I guess that gets, maybe the word idealism, I guess, came to mind when you said perfectionist.
Yes.
And so maybe there's kind of an ideal that you're working toward through the experimentations, and the goal is to make those improvements, those maybe incremental, next time is going to be better than this, and the next time after that.
Yeah, for sure.
That was one of the things that was striking too, is that actually I had a quote, and if you've looked at the website, I have a couple of quotes in general, and a couple of those quotes are from Henry David Thoreau, who I tend to go back to. And one of the things that I like about the word experimentation and some of the context for it is, it's a word he uses a lot in his book Walden. He always refers to that experience as an experiment, going into the woods for 2 years. So I like it in the context of, it's not just like something extra or something that's maybe just tried lightly. It's something that is kind of meant to have more of a larger context in one's life, maybe.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I typically ask, and part of our publication shows visual art as well as literary art. So I like to ask kind of the opposite for visual artists. I usually ask, like, do you have favorite writers or inspirational writers that you go back to? And for writers, I kind of ask the opposite question. Visual artists, you have a little bit of both, so I guess you can take it whichever way you want. Do you have a favorite in the visual or in the literary art field? Anything from classics, contemporaries, really anything goes?
Oh gosh, I have so many writers in mind. I've been taking a lot of master classes, so the mainly the online like writing ones. And so Margaret Atwood has a class on there. So I've been really inspired by her, and also Joyce Carol Oates. I've been reading a lot of them recently. I've been reading a lot recently, kind of since um, this whole year has happened. I've kind of just delved into reading a lot more. So yeah, I love them. I also love Emily Bronte. Although I will admit, as an English major, sometimes I do have to go on SparkNotes and read a summary of her chapters in order to fully understand what she is saying. But I do really enjoy Emily Bronte, and I also love C.S. Lewis, because I read those books in my childhood, so I constantly go back to C.S. Lewis and all of his work, just to kind of get into that fantasy world. And I recently stumbled upon Hemingway's short stories, so I've been reading a lot of him as well.
Oh, sure. Margaret Atwood's somebody I kind of feel like I came across once or twice in terms of reading, and didn't really make my way back to her. Oryx and Crake was the one that I feel like maybe she wrote some either extensions off of that book. I don't know if they're directly in like a series type of a concept, but that was one that was at least memorable to me for Margaret Atwood. Did you read that one, Oryx and Crake?
No, that's on my list though. I have like a long list of books that I've been meaning to read, but I have read The Handmaid's Tale, and then her new book going off of that, I believe it's called The Testaments. And then Alias Grace, I read hers as well, which I really enjoyed. And Blind Assassin is probably my favorite book by her. I read that this past summer, and yeah, I loved it. It was amazing.
Okay, nice. Good recommendations there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, yeah, Hemingway, the In Our Time collection was something I've gone back to a couple of times as far as short stories. So that's I guess that would be considered one of those classics.
Yeah.
Do you have any current projects you're working on? Anything you're excited about in the middle of at the moment?
I'm just kind of wrapping up my chlorophyll printing. Unfortunately, this process is seasonal because you need, strong UV rays to develop your prints. So, trying to make some last minute prints there, but I've already kind of noticing that the sun isn't as strong as it was a couple of weeks ago. So, hopefully, I'll be able to get a few more out this week. But I am in the process of uploading my last few chlorophyll prints onto my website, and that's at carolinerussellphotography.com/ephemeral. That's the name of the project. So yeah, just trying to wrap those up, and then I have some fun ideas in mind for my winter project, and they definitely will be experimental. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And you can see, all of my work on Instagram as well, which is at Caroline Russell Art. So that's kind of where to get the artwork. Kind of, I post that kind of quicker, and then at the end of my projects, I kind of post them on my website. So those are two places you can find my work.
Excellent. Sounds good. I'll mention the website and the Instagram up front as well, just so people can connect with you if they like what they see in the issue. And that about wraps up the big questions I had written down for you.
Thanks again for this, opportunity. This is great. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm excited for the issue to come out. So yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with me.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, I'll probably mention at the beginning too. This is our first entry into the audio interview format, so we can maybe use the experimentation word again for making the leap from doing more of the text-based interviews, which were in the previous issues, to audio format, and playing around with some the audio recording software and editing and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll see how it turns out as we speak. I guess I don't know exactly how the end result's going to be. Yeah, so yeah, it was great talking to you. And for now, we'll say we'll wait till the issue comes out, which will be the beginning of November. That'll be the issue number 5. So I'll contact you again when the issue is released.
All right. Sounds good. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to email me or anything like that. But thank you again for your time.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.